The Cold War wasn't just fought with bombs and spies. It was fought on cinema screens where truth blurred with propaganda and paranoia crept into every frame. Imagine films so daring. Governments feared them, censors hacked them apart, or entire reels vanished overnight. What secrets were too dangerous for the public eye? Stay with us as we uncover 12 Cold War spy thrillers that got censored and why they nearly disappeared. The Manchurian Candidate, 1962. When John Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate hit theaters, it stunned audiences. A psychological thriller about brainwashed soldiers, political assassinations, and Cold War paranoia, it was hailed as a masterpiece of suspense. Critics praised its daring storyline, while audiences left shaken by its implications. Could democracy itself be hijacked by hidden forces? But censorship soon followed. Just a year after release, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The eerie parallels to the film's plot, an assassin manipulated by shadowy handlers, sparked fears the movie had become too real. United Artists quickly pulled it from circulation. Officially, it wasn't banned, but theaters stopped showing it, and TV networks avoided airing it. Behind the scenes, rumors spread that Washington insiders had leaned on Hollywood to bury the film, worried it might fuel conspiracy theories. Cast and crew felt the chill. Frank Sinatra, who also starred in the movie, allegedly supported shelving it out of respect for Kennedy's family. For over 2 decades, The Manchurian Candidate virtually disappeared. Some younger audiences grew up hearing only whispers about its existence, as though it had been erased. When it resurfaced in 1988, critics called it prophetic, disturbing, and ahead of its time. Its legacy is one of both brilliance and fear. Censorship didn't erase it, it only deepened its myth. And today, the film stands as a reminder that sometimes the scariest truths are the ones hidden by silence. Funeral in Berlin, 1966. At first glance, Funeral in Berlin seemed like just another stylish Cold War caper. The follow-up to The Ipcress File, it starred Michael Caine as Harry Palmer, the anti-Bond cynical, working class, and caught between shadowy deals in a divided Berlin. Its gritty depiction of espionage felt authentic, a stark contrast to the glamorous world of James Bond. Yet its realism was precisely what worried authorities. The movie explored double crosses between British intelligence, the KGB, and defectors attempting to escape East Germany. The Berlin Wall had only been erected 5 years earlier, and depicting the smuggling of defectors struck too close to reality. West German authorities pressured distributors to soften certain sequences, while East German officials outright banned screenings, calling it dangerous Western propaganda. Some scenes allegedly showing defectors being smuggled across borders were trimmed for certain European markets. The Soviet Union denounced it as anti-Soviet hysteria, ensuring it never screened behind the Iron Curtain. Even in the UK, censors questioned whether it glamorized illegal activity. Behind the scenes, production wasn't easy either. Filming near the Berlin Wall brought real tension. East German guards monitored cast and crew, sometimes harassing them during location shoots. Michael Caine later recalled the eeriness of acting while actual armed soldiers watched from the other side. Though overshadowed by the Bond franchise, Funeral in Berlin has since gained cult respect. Its censorship reflected how fragile governments felt about even fictional depictions of East-West conflict. The film reminds us that during the Cold War, a thriller wasn't just entertainment, it was political dynamite. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, 1965. Based on John le Carré's bleak novel, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold was anything but glamorous. Released in 1965, it told the story of Alec Leamas, a jaded British spy sent into East Germany on a morally murky mission. There were no gadgets, no tuxedos, just betrayal, disillusionment, and death. Critics hailed it as one of the most realistic spy films ever made, but realism sparked controversy. Both the CIA and MI6 allegedly frowned upon the movie, believing it revealed too much about real intelligence methods. Though dramatized, its portrayal of staged defections, false flag operations, and the expendability of agents rang uncomfortably true. British censors initially considered banning several dialogue passages, worried they would erode public trust in intelligence services. In the U.S., some theaters refused to show it after whispers spread that the film was unpatriotic. The idea of Western intelligence being just as ruthless as the KGB disturbed Cold War audiences accustomed to clear-cut heroes and villains. Certain European broadcasts later cut entire exchanges, softening the film's cynicism. Behind the scenes, Le Carré himself, once an MI6 officer, claimed the film was true to the essence of espionage, dirty, lonely, and morally bankrupt. That honesty made it powerful, but also politically inconvenient. Over time, the film has been re-evaluated as a masterpiece. What was once seen as corrosive is now celebrated as groundbreaking realism. The censorship attempts failed, but they revealed how dangerous honesty could be in an age of lies. Torn Curtain, 1966. When Alfred Hitchcock released Torn Curtain, audiences expected another sleek thriller. Starring Paul Newman and Julie Andrews, it told the story of an American physicist who seemingly defects to East Germany only to be caught in a deadly game of double crosses. On the surface, it had all the makings of a Cold War blockbuster. But behind that glossy cast was chaos. Hitchcock wanted a gritty, realistic spy film, free of his usual playful suspense. Studio executives, however, feared the material was too dark. Censors in multiple countries agreed. The most infamous moment came during a brutal kitchen murder sequence in which Newman's character struggles to kill a Stasi agent. Hitchcock deliberately dragged out the scene to show how messy and horrifying killing really was. It left test audiences shaken, and European censors slashed minutes from it, arguing it was excessive. Political tensions also complicated release. In West Germany, protests erupted, claiming the film painted Germans as universally corrupt or violent. In the Eastern Bloc, it was outright banned as imperialist propaganda. Even in the U.S., NBC refused to air it uncut when television syndication rolled around, trimming entire passages of violence and political rhetoric. The film's reception was chilly. Critics called it one of Hitchcock's weaker works, but some whispered that studio interference and censorship had gutted his original vision. Newman himself later admitted he felt uncomfortable with the film's production, sensing Hitchcock's creative freedom was being stifled by Cold War paranoia. Over time, Torn Curtain has been reassessed as a flawed but fascinating experiment. What remains uncensored is Hitchcock's message. In the Cold War, no side came out clean. And perhaps that was what terrified censors most. Topaz, 1969. By the late 1960s, Cold War thrillers had become darker, more political, and more controversial. Hitchcock again entered the fray with Topaz, adapted from Leon Uris's novel about NATO secrets, Cuban Missile Crises, and Soviet infiltration. Unlike the sleek escapism of James Bond, Topaz plunged audiences into the messiness of real-world espionage. Yet the film's ambition collided with censorship almost immediately. The French government objected fiercely. Why? Because Topaz dared to suggest that French intelligence was riddled with Soviet moles, a detail inspired by real scandals. Officials pressured Universal Studios to soften the script, but Hitchcock refused. When it premiered in France, critics savaged it, and distributors quietly trimmed controversial dialogue about French betrayal. Meanwhile, the U.S. version faced another problem: its ending. Hitchcock had shot multiple conclusions, including one where a traitor commits suicide in full view of an opera audience. The MPAA feared it was too disturbing for American theaters. Another ending showing a duel was deemed ridiculous. After weeks of arguments, Universal released a heavily edited cut with an abrupt, unsatisfying finale. Hitchcock was furious. His vision had been censored into incoherence. Behind the scenes, production was fraught. Actors complained about script changes, and Hitchcock battled exhaustion. Some even whispered that the master of suspense had finally been defeated by politics. Audiences left confused, and box office receipts slumped. And yet, decades later, restored versions of Topaz revealed Hitchcock's daring original intent. What once felt like a muddled flop became a fascinating artifact of Cold War censorship. The cuts weren't just about pacing, they were about silencing uncomfortable truths. The Quiller Memorandum, 1966. At first glance, the Quiller Memorandum seemed like standard spy fare. Starring George Siegel, Alec Guinness, and Max von Sydow, it followed an American agent sent to West Berlin to dismantle a neo-Nazi cell operating under Cold War shadows. With John Barry's haunting score and Harold Pinter's sharp screenplay, the film had an eerie, cerebral edge, but its themes made authorities uneasy. The movie suggested that even decades after World War II, Nazi ideology still simmered beneath German society, and that Western intelligence services were both complicit and powerless to stop it. West German officials hated the implication, calling it defamatory. Several scenes showing collusion between ex-Nazis and Western agencies were cut for the German release. In Britain, censors debated whether its bleak tone was too demoralizing. Unlike Bond, Quiller wasn't triumphant. He was manipulated, beaten, and barely survived. Some critics even said it bordered on anti-heroic propaganda. For television syndication, entire interrogation sequences were trimmed for violence and psychological cruelty. Behind the camera, Pinter clashed with producers, refusing to water down his script's cynicism. Siegel later revealed that the set was tense as Hitchcock-style thrills gave way to Pinter's dark existentialism. The result? A spy film that felt like a nightmare rather than an adventure. Audiences at the time were divided. Some walked out confused, others hailed it as genius. Its box office was modest, but over time it became a cult favorite. Modern critics see it as one of the few spy thrillers that dared to show espionage not as glamorous, but as a moral abyss. The censorship it endured only underlined its truth, that some stories of the Cold War were too raw, too unsettling, to be told without edits. The Looking Glass War, 1970. Based on another John le Carré novel, The Looking Glass War took a grim approach to espionage. Released in 1970, it told the story of a young, inexperienced agent sent behind the Iron Curtain on what becomes a doomed mission. Unlike the glamorous world of Bond, this was espionage at its most brutal. Naive recruits, failed operations, and tragic endings. The film's unflinching realism unnerved both audiences and governments. British censors requested cuts to dialogue they feared revealed too much about MI6 recruitment and training methods. Though stylized, its depictions of spycraft felt authentic enough to raise alarm. In the U.S., distributors demanded trims to soften its bleak tone, worried that audiences would reject a spy movie where Western intelligence looked just as ruthless as their Soviet counterparts. Even more controversial was its political subtext. Critics accused it of being anti-war and anti-establishment, suggesting that intelligence agencies were incompetent, reckless, and indifferent to human lives. This angered Cold War hardliners. The film was banned in parts of Eastern Europe as capitalist defeatism, while in Britain it was quietly buried in limited distribution. Behind the scenes, actor Anthony Hopkins, still early in his career, voiced concern that much of the movie's soul had been lost to studio interference. What could have been a searing indictment of Cold War futility became, in some critics' eyes, a compromised vision. Still, for those who saw it, The Looking Glass War struck a nerve. It exposed the grim underside of espionage and proved too raw for comfort. Its censorship showed how much governments feared mirrors being held up to their own strategies. The Kremlin Letter, 1970. John Huston's The Kremlin Letter was one of the most daring spy thrillers of its era and one of the most controversial. With a star-studded cast including Richard Boone, Orson Welles, and Max von Sydow, the movie plunged into the ruthless world of Cold War espionage, where agents double-crossed each other with shocking brutality. But what shocked most wasn't just the betrayals, it was the content. The film depicted drug addiction, sexual manipulation, and even incest as tools of espionage. For 1,970, this was explosive material. American censors demanded cuts, claiming audiences weren't ready for such frank depictions. European markets trimmed sexual references and entire sequences involving psychological torment. The Soviet Union, unsurprisingly, banned it outright, calling it decadent poison. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some hailed its audacity, while others called it nihilistic and incomprehensible. Audiences were divided, and box office numbers tanked. Many blamed censorship, arguing that Huston's complex narrative had been hacked apart by nervous distributors, leaving only fragments of his original vision. Behind the scenes, Huston reportedly fought bitterly to keep the film intact, but studios overruled him. Cast members later recalled that the final product felt like a movie mutilated by fear. For decades, the Kremlin letter was dismissed as a failure. Yet in recent years, it has been reappraised. Uncut versions reveal a daring, uncompromising film that predicted how far spy thrillers could push boundaries. Its censorship, ironically, only solidified its legend as one of the Cold War's most dangerous films to watch, The Serpent, 1973. Henri Verneuil's French-Italian thriller, The Serpent, also known as Night Flight from Moscow, starred Yul Brynner, Henry Fonda, and Dirk Bogarde in a story of defection, betrayal, and espionage at the height of East-West tensions. With its international cast and sweeping scope, it had the potential to rival Bond films in scale, but its themes cut much deeper. The plot centered on a high-ranking Soviet official defecting to the West with explosive secrets. Unlike typical thrillers, it portrayed both American and Soviet intelligence as morally compromised. This did not sit well with governments on either side. In France, distributors came under quiet pressure to trim scenes suggesting NATO complicity in shady operations. In the U.S., several television edits removed lines of dialogue accusing Western leaders of being as corrupt as Moscow. In the Soviet Union, the film never saw release. Officials denounced it as a smear campaign, but Western critics noted that its uncomfortable honesty about political corruption might have been just as unsettling for NATO allies. European broadcasts later censored interrogation scenes deemed too cruel for public television. Behind the scenes, Verneuil fought hard to keep the film intact, but international financiers insisted on changes for commercial markets. Some actors admitted disappointment at seeing powerful scenes diluted. Brynner, in particular, believed the film could have been a masterpiece, if not for the political scissors. Despite censorship, The Serpent became a cult classic in Europe, appreciated for its ambiguity and moral complexity. Today, it stands as a haunting reminder that Cold War thrillers didn't just entertain, they exposed truths governments wanted buried. 3 Days of the Condor, 1975. Sidney Pollack's 3 Days of the Condor was more than just a thriller. It was a mirror held up to American paranoia. Starring Robert Redford as a low-level CIA analyst who stumbles onto a conspiracy, the film painted intelligence agencies as ruthless entities willing to kill their own to protect hidden agendas. Released in the post-Watergate era, it struck a nerve. Audiences praised its taut suspense, but government insiders were alarmed. Rumors swirled that the CIA requested edits, particularly concerning dialogue that hinted at U.S. agencies orchestrating coups abroad. While Paramount denied official pressure, industry whispers suggested that some lines were toned down in early cuts to avoid political firestorms. In several international markets, distributors trimmed sequences that suggested oil companies were colluding with intelligence agencies, too sensitive a topic during the global energy crisis. Behind the scenes, Pollack defended his vision. He argued that the film wasn't anti-American, but anti-secrecy. Redford, too, admitted that the script hit too close to the bone for comfort. Critics noticed how its release coincided with congressional hearings exposing CIA abuses, making the film feel like a dramatized documentary. In the Soviet Union, it was banned outright, labeled as capitalist paranoia. But in America, censorship was subtler. Television syndication cut violent scenes and softened the bleak finale. Some viewers decades later discovered the uncut version and were stunned by how much sharper its critique had once been. 3 Days of the Condor endures as one of the most intelligent spy thrillers ever made. Its censorship wasn't about protecting audiences, it was about controlling narratives. And that, perhaps, was the most chilling truth of all. The Osterman Weekend, 1983. Sam Peckinpah's The Osterman Weekend, based on Robert Ludlum's novel, was destined for controversy. Released in 1983, it told the story of a TV journalist manipulated by the CIA into spying on his friends, who are accused of being Soviet agents. But as the weekend unravels, nothing is what it seems, and the agency's motives are revealed to be sinister. From the start, censors were uneasy. The film's depiction of the CIA as corrupt and manipulative clashed with Hollywood's usual patriotic framing. Several studios reportedly balked at distribution, fearing backlash during Ronald Reagan's renewed Cold War push. American TV networks later edited out entire sequences of torture, nudity, and the agency's darkest conspiracies. In Europe, distributors trimmed violent scenes to meet censorship boards' demands. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Peckinpah, already in poor health, fought bitterly with producers who demanded changes. Ludlum himself disowned the adaptation, claiming it butchered his book's message. What reached theaters was a film compromised by censorship and executive meddling, yet still powerful enough to disturb audiences. Critics were split. Some called it incoherent. Others saw brilliance buried under cuts. Over time, however, its reputation grew. Film historians now view The Osterman Weekend as a haunting reflection of surveillance culture and media manipulation. A film censored not just for its content, but for daring to expose uncomfortable truths. The irony? What censors tried to hide the corruption of information was exactly what the film was about. Gorky Park, 1983. Topping our list is Gorky Park, a chilling Cold War thriller directed by Michael Apted and based on Martin Cruz Smith's bestseller. Released in 1983, it followed Moscow, Detective Arkady Renko, played by William Hurt, investigating a triple murder in Gorky Park. What begins as a murder mystery spirals into a tale of corruption, black market fur trades, and the brutality of Soviet power. Western audiences found it mesmerizing, an American film that dared to portray Soviet life with grit and nuance. But censorship was immediate and fierce. The Soviet Union banned it outright, branding it anti-Soviet propaganda. Even within Western markets, distributors worried. Certain scenes, like brutal depictions of KGB interrogations, were trimmed for television airings. The novel's raw critique of Soviet bureaucracy had already been controversial. The film made it visual, visceral, and impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes, the production struggled with authenticity. Filming in Moscow was impossible, so Helsinki doubled as the Soviet capital. Soviet officials denounced the film before it even premiered, claiming it fabricated Russian life. Yet critics in the West praised it as one of the most daring Cold War films of its time. Its legacy is one of persistence. Despite bans, pirated VHS copies circulated in Eastern Europe, whispered about as dangerous contraband. Viewers who managed to see it behind the Iron Curtain described it as electrifying a glimpse into truths their governments tried to hide. Gorky Park wasn't just censored, it became forbidden fruit, proof that storytelling could pierce even the thickest walls of propaganda. Censorship during the Cold War wasn't just about cutting films, it was about controlling memory, deciding what stories nations could tell. But suppressed films often returned stronger, carrying with them the weight of silence. Which of these thrillers do you think was the most dangerous to the powerful? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.